Arthur is fighting with robot number 8. Arthur thinks about the words Tesha said, if Arthur is overconfident in many things. Arthur is very confident in his abilities in magic, fighting, and intelligence because Arthur is good at these things. Arthur continues to attack the robot with his sword. If Arthur is so confident in all these things, it is because Arthur is good at them. Suddenly, Arthur steps on the ground and attacks the robot. There are things that Arthur is not good at. Does Arthur think that the people around Arthur don't notice that Arthur is always pretending to be happy or unaffected? Arthur's response is to try to soften his feelings toward Tesha, even to tease her. Arthur attacking the robot is the immature Arthur. The robot then issued a low mana warning. Arthur stops punching and the robot issues a system shutdown warning. Arthur then looks exhausted. Sylvie tells Arthur not to overexert himself as Arthur is still healing. Arthur replies that he is fine. Suddenly, there is a knock at the door. Professor Gloricia knocks on the door and asks if Arthur is inside. Arthur says yes. Professor Gloricia says she came to check on Arthur and Princess Tesha because they were both absent from her class. She wanted to make sure they weren't misbehaving. She was also surprised to see the ruined courtyard and asked what had happened there. Arthur replies that he was just practicing and Tesha was not with him. Professor Gloricia says she guessed wrong and invites Arthur to his last class as he has already missed 2. Arthur accepts the invitation. Professor Gloricia is amazed at Arthur's huge private training room and asks what training could make such a room so reinforced. She finds Arthur even more enigmatic. Arthur returns to class, and some of his classmates comment on his return. Arthur looks sleepy. Sylvie asks how Arthur could have slept so much. Arthur replies that he was training, not sleeping. Professor Maynard calls Arthur and says that he is glad that Arthur has finally come to class. He also hears that Arthur has recovered from his injury. Professor Maynard asks about Arthur's condition and asks Arthur to share his knowledge of spell formations. Arthur explains what a charm formation is. Professor Maynard praises Arthur's answer and asks everyone to imagine a world where everyone can read each other's minds. Professor Maynard said that in a hypothetical world where fleeting thoughts that could make the purest man seem evil or the kindest woman seem cruel were out in the open for others to read, such a world would be home to the best which is ever known. Professor Maynard asked why this should be so. A student replied that once one has mastered the mantra, there is no need to chant. Professor Maynard replied that mastering something is ambiguous. He said that people chant because the words themselves affect their consciousness. Chanting fills the magician's mind with the right suggestions that shape the mana into the desired spell. Professor Maynard gives a humorous example by saying that if he were to say, "I have always loved you" to a woman who hated him, there would definitely be some kind of reaction from her. His mantra of saying, "I have always loved you" would trigger a reaction of disgust, a kick, or a slap. Arthur commented that Professor Maynard knew how to get the attention of his students. Professor Maynard went on to say that in a similar way, our thoughts affect our spells, allowing for abbreviated or even no spells when a high level of focus and visualization is achieved. Therefore, if there were a world where everyone could read each other's minds, that world would have the greatest magicians because they would have complete control over their minds. Professor Maynard asks his students to open the textbook to page 23. Arthur thinks that what is the point of going to class when all he can think about is fighting Tesha? Arthur also thinks that Tesha's words are bothering him. Sylvie said that what her mother said was true. But there were many people who hated her when she became an adventurer, but that never stopped her. Arthur asked Sylvie how she could remain unaware of her shortcomings if Sylvie was so insightful. Arthur says that he may be distracted, but at least Lucas can try not to be too obvious. 3 students are approaching her. The lead student is blonde and tall and his name is Lucas. Sylvie is staring at Lucas and his other 2 friends with an angry expression. 2 students who were walking behind Lucas earlier explained to Arthur, "We just want to make sure you get back to the dorm safely," one of them said. The other added, "Even at Xyrus Academy, it can be dangerous after dark." Arthur replied sarcastically, Am I in danger of having my pants pulled down, too? He said, how dare you mock me? Lucas grabbed his classmate by the collar and pulled him back. He coughed in pain. Gook. Lucas said, enough of this nonsense. Lucas looked at Arthur angrily. Lucas asked, do you think I'll forget how you ran away during our duel if you keep avoiding me with your tail between your legs? Arthur replied, there's a hole in the ground. Lucas interrupted, I was asking how you escaped my Infernocade spell and made it to the center of the training arena and protected the elf princess in less than a second. Arthur grabbed Lucas' hand and said, first of all, after throwing Lucas' hand away, Arthur said, that's no way to ask someone, and secondly, the two of them looked at each other, and Arthur said, why should I tell you? Lucas smiled and said, I know. Lucas continued, you used an artifact, right? How did an ordinary brat like you get your hands on one? Maybe that little elf in our class gave it to you, Princess Tessia, right? Arthur thought of something and said, he never learns, does he? One of Lucas' friends shouted as he said, you sneaky bastard. I bet you used that same trick to seduce Princess Kathleen. When Arthur asked, what, Lucas' friend said, don't play dumb. Even if you're a little handsome, you're still a common scum. One of Lucas' friends said, hey, you're spilling the mana. He slapped his friend's hand and said, shut up. He should know his place. The other friend replied, you idiot. You're going to get us all in trouble. Lucas said, leave him alone. Princess Kathleen deserves better. She deserves a pure human of royal blood like me. Arthur raised his hands and replied, look, I'm not courting anyone. Arthur continued, but it's none of your business to decide who Kathleen deserves. Lucas' friend became hysterical. It's Princess Kathleen. And she thinks so too. She even got my handkerchief for me. Lucas' friend puts the handkerchief to his face and inhales deeply. In the next panel, Lucas says to himself, this fat guy is crazy. Lucas' friend says, he said I was the one. Sylvie says to Arthur, Dad, there's something wrong with him. I know, and the amount of mana he's losing isn't normal either. Lucas' friend starts to lose control. He says, but you didn't, so that means he jumps on Arthur shouting you should be dead. Arthur looks surprised by the attack. Arthur says, seriously? And turns to avoid the rock. Arthur yells, Sylvie, wait. Arthur creates a mana shield. Sylvie jumps towards Lucas' rampaging friend. Arthur grabs the arm of Lucas' friend. Arthur knocks Lucas' friend to the ground. Lucas' friend is buried under the debris. Arthur says, do you realize that you have now assaulted a member of the disciplinary committee? His friend asks Lucas, hey, I think we should stop him. Lucas says, what do you mean? We didn't do anything. Lucas continues, actually, we're scared right now with what's happening. Arthur asks, you really expect me to believe that? Lucas says, see, there's nothing here, no magic, no weapons. His friend said, what are we going to do about Manhwa? He doesn't look well. Lucas asked, aren't you worried about losing to Manhwa in the dueling class next week? One of Lucas' friends replied, why yes then. Lucas said, try not to get hurt again. I don't want you to run away from our next duel. Arthur thinks about Lucas' friend in the trance. Manhwa said, die, die. Arthur blocks a stone projectile thrown at him. Arthur stares intently at Manhwa, who loses control. Arthur creates a mana shield. In the next panel, Arthur blocks the punch of Lucas' friend, who loses control. Arthur thinks, how can the orange core be so strong? He has even more mana than Lucas, and he's using it all for offense. Arthur thinks, I may have to break my seal if I want to catch him without killing him. Sylvie changes into her true form. Sylvie knocks the out-of-control Manhwa to the ground. Manhwa lies in the rubble. Arthur is standing next to Sylvie. Sylvie says, I'm done waiting. Claire runs up to Arthur. Claire says, Arthur. Claire explains, I was patrolling nearby when I felt a large mana fluctuation. Claire asks, what happened? Arthur replies, I'm not sure. She suddenly filled up with mana before going berserk and attacking me. Claire approaches Manhwa and examines his wounds. Claire mumbles, damn. She continues, never again. Arthur asks, Are there any other cases like him at the school? Claire replies, only one. It happened while you were still recovering in the infirmary. Arthur asks, do you know what happened to him? His magic output was very strong, and there were bloody symbols on his back. Claire said, I will tell you more about this at our next DC meeting. I need to tell the rest of the team. Claire said, just tell Director Goodsky everything you noticed when you caught him. Claire knocks on the door and a voice says enter. Claire and Arthur enter a room. Claire and Arthur look at the two people facing Warden Goodsky. The two people turn to face them. Arthur looked surprised. He said, her. In the room, a blonde man and a silver-haired woman stood looking at them. Arthur looked surprised when Claire tapped him on the shoulder. Claire exclaimed in surprise, you are Lance Baron and Lance Alier. For real, the two lances appear to be standing upright. Director Godsky explained that they were members of the disciplinary committee and some of the most promising magicians of this generation. Claire looked nervous and said, it's an honor, sir, madam. And my dream is to become a lance one day. The blonde man nodded and continued his conversation. Baron asks Director Godsky to take appropriate measures as soon as possible. Director Godsky nods in agreement. They both leave the room. Alia pats Claire on the shoulder and says, I will support you. Alia smiled at her. Claire looks happy. Sylvie tells Arthur, you're strong. Arthur confirms, yes, I know. Incredibly strong. Director Godsky asks the two about the urgent matter. They sit down and begin to explain. Director Godsky explains that Lance Baron was once a student at the academy and his younger brother is now attending, so he is just delivering the news in person. Claire looked amazed and said, wow, I didn't think I'd get a chance to see them in person. I just hope you bring good news. Director Godsky sighed and said, that's enough of that. Please let me know what happens. Arthur explains the events he witnessed, especially Manhwa's strange behavior and unstable mana fluctuations, as well as his abnormal magical abilities. Director Godsky asks if Manhwa has a bloody symbol tattooed on his back. Director Godsky looked pensive and said, I see. Arthur realizes that Warden Godsky knows something. He asks if Director Godsky knows what is wrong with Manhwa. Director Godsky explains that neither the medic nor the artificer know exactly what it is. Director Godsky explains that they have contacted the Witches Guild to send some researchers to coordinate with Gideon and some of their own staff on this matter, and hopefully they will find out soon. He then instructs Claire to continue the DC officers' patrols between classes and to get more staff to help out at night as well. Claire responds, understood. Principal Godsky added, good to have you back, Arthur. The DC officers are going to need all the help they can get. Arthur and Claire leave the room. Director Godsky looks worried and asks his owl, is it wise to involve the students in this? Principal Godsky continues, what if they really are? In the worst case, sacrifices may be necessary. We have gone too far. Why are they already moving? He looked worried. Arthur and Claire say goodnight and agree to meet at the DC meeting the next morning. Arthur watches Lucas and Baron. He thinks to himself, so even that spoiled brat bowed to his brother, I guess Caspian was right. It won't matter unless I get strong enough to kill Lucas' half-brother. Arthur thought, with his brother backing him up, I can't hurt Lucas, at least not yet. His eyes glow blue. Sylvie looks surprised. Alia watches Arthur and says, that's some intense bloodlust you're showing for a lance. Alia pulls her sword out of her dimensional ring and says, one of the disadvantages of keeping your weapon in a dimensional ring, it takes too long to get it out. Arthur picked up his sword and said, I think there's been a misunderstanding. I hold no grudge against Lance Baron. This is the first time I've met him today. Alia replied, even if you suppress your presence, I know you know. Of course, even as a dual-element mage, you won't be able to touch him. Arthur asked, is Lance Baron that strong? Alia replied, very scary. Arthur looks at Baron and Lucas. Arthur asks, how strong are you? Alia replies, about this strong. Arthur thinks, what a strange sense of humor. You could at least give me a little chuckle or something. Alia continued, I must be the weakest of the lance. Arthur pats Alia and says, patience, patience. Alia thinks, why does that feel more insulting? Alia continues, Baron is definitely one of the strongest. Arthur thinks, so that's how he was able to sense me long before I realized it. Alia continues, looks like Baron is finished. It was nice talking to you, kid. Perhaps we will meet again. Arthur bows and thanks Alia for answering a question from a common student. Alia replies, if my brother were still here, he would be your age. So, thank you. Alia strokes Arthur's hair. Alia and Baron leave Arthur. The students are gossiping about the incident of the night before. One of them said, did you hear what happened last night? Apparently, a second year went crazy and attacked another student. Listen to this. I heard that it was actually Manhwa. That can't be the fat one from House Hutchem? Arthur and Sylvie happened to overhear this conversation. Arthur thought, looks like the rumor has spread. Sylvie asked Arthur, why do people gossip so much, Dad? Arthur replied, that's a good question. Arthur enters the boardroom. Arthur enters the DC boardroom and looks puzzled when he sees his colleagues sitting glumly around the table. He asks, what's going on? Claire tells Arthur it's Manhwa. He died last night. Arthur is surprised when Claire answers him. He says what? Arthur asked, how did he die? Another student answered, the medical artifact that treated Manhwa not stop the leakage of his mana. Arthur asks, leaking mana, even when he was unconscious? Claire replied, it has to do with the symbols on his back. Arthur asked again, what did they find? Kavlin replied, a little. Kavlin continued, and what they have found, they have not revealed. Even their parents refused to reveal it to them at this time. The black-haired student pounded his fist on the table and said, what's the point of having a disciplinary committee if they're going to keep us away from the things that matter? Claire ran a hand through her hair and said, never mind. Now that Arthur is here, we will reorganize and strengthen our patrol schedule. In the hallway, the blonde student said, you two are not off to a good start. Not that I care, Arthur explained. Schedule-wise, it's better for me since I'm taking upper and lower division classes. I'm just surprised at how late we have to patrol. The blonde student asked, by the way, I was quite surprised to learn that this dagger is actually a communication tool. Arthur replied, me too. I thought it was just for show. Kavlin said, I was more surprised that Kai was the one who volunteered to patrol alone. And so was most of the campus. Arthur responded, are you really surprised? Because that's not what your face says. The blonde student said, I heard from Curtis that Kai is pretty famous for avoiding work. Arthur said, he's probably just tired of patrolling with Theodore. He continued, it's too bad we can't patrol together. Why is your brother so against it? Kavlin replied, I just told him that you became my friend after we shared skinship. The blonde student replied, so that's why. Arthur stands in front of his friends and says, see you in class, my students. In the classroom, Arthur stands in front of the students and asks, so, has everyone had a chance to think about the question I asked yesterday? Is the color of a wizard's mana core a really accurate way to measure their level? One student replied, I think the mana core is a very good way to accurately measure a wizard's power level. The blonde student added, not only does it correlate with how much effort and time a wizard puts into perfecting their core, but it also speaks volumes about their potential as a wizard. Arthur cut in, wrong, using core mana as a measure ignores every other factor that makes up a witch. The color of a witch's mana core does not take into account intelligence, reaction speed, battle instinct, spell knowledge, and so on. It's like judging a soldier's fighting ability by his muscle size. We can say with certainty that she is strong, but we cannot say that he is a better fighter than someone with less muscle. A student asked, then what is a better way to measure an opponent's magical ability? Arthur replied, that's easy. Don't do that. The students looked confused. Arthur explained, think about it. Even if you can accurately measure someone's martial power by sensing their core level of mana, What would you do if your opponent's power was lower than yours? Would you beat him, or would you pick on him while bragging about your superiority? He continued, in situations where you are forced to fight, assuming that you are weak against the mage you are fighting will prevent you from being careless. But enough about that for now. Arthur said, let's try again the exercise we did yesterday. I hope you've all practiced. Arthur ran outside and yelled, why didn't you wake me up after class? Sylvie followed him and said, I fell asleep too. Then she stands up and says, sorry, I'm late, Professor Glory. Professor Glory says, oh no, you can't. I won't risk letting you out until you're fully recovered. Sit in the stands, Arthur thought. At least I won't have to deal with Lucas bothering me for another duel. Arthur made his way to the stands and Sylvie called out, Mom. Tesha sits in the stands and hugs Sylvie. As Arthur sits next to Tesha, Tesha says, you don't have to explain yourself, Art. Tesha continued, I've let my hair down and said some things I wish I hadn't. Arthur replied, no, you didn't. There is a lot of truth in what you told me earlier. He continued, in a way, I think I know how you feel about me, but I've always been afraid to face it. Feelings are much more complicated than magic or combat. I can't get better at it just by practicing. Tesha replied, me too. You know, I lost control of my emotions and brought it up with Lelia when she told me never to tell anyone. Arthur replied, no, you're much better than me. All I ever did was run away from you. He continued, and you don't deserve this. I'm sorry, but I can't have a relationship with you. Tesha looked at him sadly. Tesha looked at Arthur with a sad expression. She continued, at least for now. Tesha, seemingly surprised, asked, for now. Arthur nodded. Yes, Arthur smiled broadly. Maybe when we're older. Tay looked at him with an unhappy expression. And you just assumed I would wait for you? He asked. Arthur said, I know how popular you are. His expression became more serious. And to be honest, I didn't even know how long it would take me to be ready. Tesha smiled, looking relieved. Good, just so you know. Arthur sighed. Tesha poked Arthur's cheek with her finger. I can trust you, right? Asked Tesha. Tesha pointed at Arthur with a stern expression. You're not going to date another girl at school after telling me all this, are you? Arthur crossed his arms and shook his head. I personally guarantee it. Tesha sighed. It has to be. Arthur stood as he said, and I really have no intention of making you wait for me. Arthur leaned forward and kissed Tesha on the forehead. Arthur is walking down the school corridor with a nervous expression on his face. Other students are looking at him. Sylvie says, hey, you kissed mommy. Arthur put his head down on the table. Shut up, he said. It was just on the forehead. Arthur said, forget it. An old teacher is teaching in a classroom. Another student raises his hand and asks, I'm a little confused. Professor Drywell. The student continues, gravity, lightning, metal, magma, sound, plants, and ice all exist naturally in our world. So why doesn't our world produce these types of mana, unlike fire, air, earth, and water? Professor Drywell smiled. Good question. The professor explained, you see, although many magic theorists have pondered for decades and done countless researches, no one is sure exactly why. Some theorists believe that because a certain set of conditions must be met for the abnormal elements to occur, there is no direct correlation to them. Although there are some exceptions, such as fire, which certainly does not suddenly appear for no reason. For this reason, most mages believe that fire is the highest form of normal magic, as it is very close to deviant magic itself. Oh dear, I have gone off topic myself, haha. Another theory comes from a time when ancient witches still existed long ago, and Arthur daydreamed and muttered, I wonder how Tess feels now that we've talked, he thought. Ah, so that's why this class is so behind, just talking? In her room, Tesha looked at her reflection in the mirror. She was wearing a gray hooded sweatshirt with deer antlers. He kissed me, she thinks as she stomps her foot. Tess imagined herself and Arthur with two small children, one with red hair like Arthur and one with gray hair like herself. I don't want to get too excited, but I wonder what our children will look like. Then she comes back to reality. Wait, but to have children, Art and I have too. 2 boys and a girl are writing graffiti on a wall. One of the boys has red hair and the girl has blonde hair. The graffiti reads elves dwarves out. Arthur looked at what the boys were doing. That looks like fun. Can I come? Said Arthur. Shit. It's a DC officer, shouted the red-haired boy. The blonde girl made a water ball and threw it at Arthur. Watch out, you bastard, the girl yelled. Arthur swung at the girl's leg, knocking her down. How dare you hit a girl, said the boy. I consider myself a champion of gender equality, Arthur said. A green ball of energy appeared in his palm. Or be quietly escorted to the administration office? A security guard came over and grabbed the boy. There is no symbol on his back, the officer said. There's no symbol on his back either, Arthur said as he looked at the girl. Damn, said the officer. The officer said to Arthur, I'll bring them both back. Are you okay being alone for a while? Arthur nodded. I'll be fine here. Arthur is walking with Sylvie. Dad, I'm hungry, bored, and tired, Sylvie said. We're almost done for the night. We'll eat after, Arthur said. I seem to be approaching Kai's patrol route. I should head back. Sylvie said, Dad, I feel strange mana. Arthur hid behind a pillar while carrying Sylvie. He saw someone in a cloak and dark pants walking in front of him. Arthur climbed to the top of the building. Sylvie said, Dad, hurry, the black cape is going up there. Arthur said, be patient, Sylv, he might sense us if we follow too closely. Arthur continued, if there are more of them, we need him to lead us to their hideout. Arthur watched the cloaked figure. Suddenly someone called out to him, Arthur. Arthur thought, who? The blonde student approaches Arthur. The cloaked figure disappears and Arthur says, damn it. The blonde student appears behind Arthur. What are you doing here, Arthur? I'm following someone who might be related to Manhwa. I could have found out where they might be hiding if you hadn't, Arthur said. Still, you should have told me as soon as you saw whoever you were following come into my patrol area, the student said. Where is Theo? Isn't he your partner? Asked Arthur. Theo's taking them to the administration office. We caught some students painting graffiti on the walls, Arthur said. So no one patrols your area? Asked the blonde student. It shouldn't take him long, Arthur said. Arthur's dagger began to glow yellow. It's glowing yellow, Arthur said. That's what it means. Theo is activating the dagger. Arthur looked surprised. The blonde student tapped him on the shoulder and said, since this is my area, I'll try to find the person you're stalking. You go help your partner, the blonde student said. He's wearing a brown hooded coat with dark pants and long boots, Arthur said. The blonde student is standing and looking at Arthur. A dark-haired man is sitting on a bench, his hands clutching his head in apparent pain. A large lion sits beside him. 2 others are standing nearby, watching anxiously. One of them, the younger one, has blonde hair and looks surprised. Arthur runs over to the man in pain. Are you all right? What happened? He asked worriedly. The younger blonde man replied, he got hit in the back of his thick head. That's why. He rubbed the back of his neck as he spoke. The red-headed man looked serious. He was ambushed while taking the 2 students to the administration building, he said. They were gone by the time we got here, but we should have been able to find them since they were students. Arthur thought for a moment. In that case, do you think one of their friends helped them? He asked. The young blonde man shook his head. No. An ordinary student wouldn't be able to knock me out with just 1 punch. He said it must have been someone older. Arthur continued, ... or someone like Manhwa. Arthur asked, were you able to see your attacker? The dark-haired man replied, I think I caught a glimpse of him before I passed out, but it wasn't clear at all. Arthur asked Sylvie, didn't Kai have a cut on his arm? Sylv, I think so, she replied. The dark-haired man turns around and asks Arthur, what did you do when you came from Kai's area? To which Arthur replies, not much. The young blonde man says, see, I knew Kai didn't seem to be doing much. The tall blonde woman interjects, despite his shifty appearance, he's pretty reliable for a human. The red-haired man stands next to the lion and asks, are you racist, Miss DC officer? In the end, we couldn't find Theodore's attacker, Arthur said. Worse, Kai couldn't find the hooded man. He adds, it still bothers me that Kai called out my name so loudly. He said, am I thinking too much? Theo told me to trust Kai, but time in the wound on his arm made me feel it. She paused and frowned. A professor asks, is that a boy? Gah, Arthur said in surprise. What a mess, he said, looking at the device. The professor said, damn, I thought you were going to come up with another groundbreaking invention or something. The green-haired woman asks Arthur, what's the matter? You look a little dazed. Arthur replies, it's nothing. Just a little tired from the disciplinary committee business, while continuing to repair his tools. Arthur is sitting in class, trying to concentrate. I need to concentrate more. I can barely remember what happened in my first 2 classes, he thought. Someone whispers and Arthur turns around. The green-haired woman handed him a package. I have something for you, she says. Arthur accepts the package with joy. You're the best, he exclaimed. The package says light-producing artifact. A battle is underway. Augmenters, stay information, a man shouted. Keep an eye on your conjurer, he added. A red-haired man ran forward, and a purple-haired woman shouted instructions, don't chase your opponent. Arthur was sitting on a rock with Sylvie. I can't believe that even after getting involved with Manhwa, Lucas only got a few days suspension. He said, Mom's not here, Sylvie said. Arthur said, stop sulking, we met her in the gym last night anyway. Oh yeah. No patrol tonight, exclaimed Sylvie happily. Arthur saw a woman with purple hair approaching. She sat down beside him. Arthur asked, is anything wrong? The woman replied, the council has forbidden visits to most of the dungeons I usually take my class to while the Lance is investigating something. Arthur asked, so there will be no trips this semester? The woman replied, there will still be trips, but they will probably be lower level than the ones I usually take my students on. She chuckled. Don't blame me if the dungeons are too easy for you. Arthur stood in front of Tasha, who was sitting on the floor. Let's call it a day here, he said. Thank you, Tasha replied. Arthur asks Tasha, would you like to cool off a bit? The two are sitting by the pool. Arthur asks, how have you been feeling lately? Any symptoms of resistance to your animal will? Tasha replies, not since our team combat mechanics class with Professor Glory. Arthur nodded, that's good, he said. Be sure to let me or Principal Goodsky know if anything feels off, as Grandpa won't be back from Elenoir for a few weeks. Tasha replied, I will, don't worry. Arthur continued, assuming nothing bad happens, at our current rate, you should be fully assimilated in a few weeks. Arthur said, if we're lucky, your ability core might even be high level. Tasha suddenly doused him with water. What's that for? Shouted Arthur. To help you cool down, Tasha replied with a smile. Tasha continued, we finished training today and it's still lunchtime. You should relax. Arthur sprayed her with water again. Arthur said, sorry, you're still sweating, so I wanted to help you cool down as well. They both laughed. Tasha said, okay, I think I've cooled off enough. Arthur replied, same. Arthur said, hi Director Good. He paused and his eyes widened. Principal Goodsky was standing near them. Warden Goodsky is standing in the doorway. He looked a little tired and had a scar on his face. Tasha rushes over to him with a worried look on her face. She looks surprised by Director Goodsky's condition. Tasha asked, what happened, Master? Director Goodsky casually replied, nothing to worry about, dear. He explained that he had just had a vigorous sparring session at the Wizards Guild to stretch his aging bones. Arthur asked, I thought you were meeting with the council? Director Goodsky replied, am I not allowed to take a little trip afterward to relieve the stress? Tasha examines the wound on Director Goodsky's face. Still, you shouldn't have overexerted yourself to the point of getting hurt like that. Director Goodsky replies, I'll remember that next time. He then reminds Arthur that the next class is about to begin. Principal Goodsky says to Arthur, "I hope you don't mind us using your practice room for our lesson tonight." Arthur replied, "Not at all." Arthur continued, "Tess and I have finished our assimilation exercises for today." After Arthur left, Arthur thought to himself, "She must be hiding something, but it's not my place to interfere." Elijah chided a sleepy Arthur in class. "You've been yawning since we left the dorm. What time did you get back last night?" Elijah asked. Arthur replied, "I don't know. You were asleep, I know, and I got home pretty late because there was also a club social last night." He continued. "Which club did you try this time?" asked Arthur. "The Chain Casting Research Club." "There are a lot of girls there," said Elijah. Elijah continued to be excited about his new club until a teacher rebuked him. AHGM. The teacher said, "Well, I'd love to hear more about your budding love life. May I continue to teach my class?" The students laugh as Elijah is scolded by the teacher. The teacher says, "I know that many of you have heard about what happened to your classmates a few days ago in light of that tragic event." The teacher continued, "I feel the need to teach you about the dangers of using this power that many of us take for granted. While many of the best magicians and doctors are working together to find out exactly what caused Manhwa's death, what we do know is that he was using magic too powerful for his body to handle. You all know the danger of overextending your mana core." The teacher explains the danger of overtaxing the mana core, which can lead to permanent injury or even death. A female student asked, "But professor, I heard that Manhwa is still alive after his counterattack. Shouldn't he have survived with the help of a mana regeneration potion?" The teacher replied, "Well, this is true in most cases. There are exceptions." Master continued, "I'm just saying this to cover all the bases and to warn you of the dangers, not because I'm saying it applies specifically to Manhwa. External aids that forcibly increase the mana reserve are often accompanied by many side effects, one of which is excessive mana leakage from the core." Arthur thought, but that doesn't explain his crazy behavior and the mana leakage marks etched on his back. Arthur said, "Good afternoon, everyone. Since none of you have been able to come close to what I demonstrated a few days ago, I'm going to start today's lesson by giving you all a hint." Arthur asks Lester to come down and demonstrate something. "Imagine for a moment that the mighty Lester here is my opponent. I, as an augmentation who is afraid to approach his intimidating form, choose to attack him with a ranged spell. This is the spell I have prepared." Arthur tore off a sheet of paper. Arthur said, "This is what you are used to seeing. This time I will prepare the spell I showed you last time." Arthur flicked something on Lester's forehead. "I'd say that's a pretty big clue to the augmentations," Arthur said. Two Lances are sitting at a table. Alia asks, "Do you know why Lansvari called us here?" "I think my next mission is to help Lance Aya in Elenoir." Baron answers, "It has to do with something I found in the dungeons on the outskirts of the Beast Glades." "Something you found?" Alia asked. Soon a white-haired woman arrived, sat down on a chair and said, "Since there are only 3 of us, I'll skip the formalities." She continued, "The reason the council and I decided to remove you from your mission in Elenoir with Aya is because we recently found signs in the deepest levels of some dungeons. Traces of witches who are not from Dicathan." "What?" Alia exclaimed. "As far as I know, it has just been discovered that there is another continent," Alia continued. Baron replied, "Just because we just discovered it doesn't mean it's the same for them." "Has the material been confirmed?" asked Baron. The white-haired woman nodded and said, "The cloth you found is made of animal fibers that have yet to be discovered or are not native to Dicathan. I also felt the mana permeating the cloth." "Has the council received any more information about this?" she asked. "Whatever form of magic was woven into the fabric was deactivated when it was torn," the white-haired woman replied. "Alia, you were brought here for another reason," the white-haired woman said. "Whatever you need, Lansvari," Alia replied. Lansvari placed a scroll on the table. Lansvari explained, There have been unusual sightings of giant bloodworms by adventurers in various parts of the Beast Glades. At first there was nothing. But after compiling all the sightings and checking with some animal behavior experts, it appears that they are deviating greatly from their usual tunneling patterns. Lansvari continued, while it may be a bit of an exaggeration, it is impossible not to connect the recent sightings of rampaging mana beasts with the possibility of alacrines deep within the dungeon. I led the investigation in the Beast Glades, but Baron said, I will be able to cover a much larger area with my sensory magic. Alia said, you will work alone so that your speed is not hindered. That could be dangerous, Varu said. Baron replied, I'll continue to focus on the deeper areas, but I'm afraid the giant bloodworms are burrowing closer to the lower-level dungeons near Sapin. We can wait for Micah to finish her mission in Darv and let you to go together, Vari said. No, Alia replied, the chances of the adventurers and students who are still out there getting into danger will increase the longer we wait. I'll start investigating right away. Arthur opens the door and is surprised to see his friends practicing. Someone is seen bouncing back, revealing Kathleen to be the source of the ice spell. She stands calmly amidst the shards of ice. This shows the ongoing competition or training between them. Regis is using gravity magic to manipulate movement. Curtis, struggling to regain his footing, tries to concentrate. Regis declares downfall as he uses his gravity magic to knock Curtis back to the ground. Arthur admits his difficulty with gravity magic, a power he seems to have learned only recently. This underscores his vulnerability despite his earlier confident demeanor. Curtis uses his fire magic to counter Regis' attack, strategically melting the ice to avoid another painful blow. He plunges his sword into the melting ice, narrowly avoiding Regis' next gravity-based maneuver. Frustrated, Regis stepped up his attacks. Curtis countered with his explosive magic, temporarily stunning Regis. Regis, impressed by Curtis' ingenuity, grins, relishing the challenge, and announces the start of round 5. Their duel is interrupted by a silver-haired teacher, Kai, who relays orders from their superior, Claire, to stop the fight. Arthur expresses his confusion about Kai's type of magic, as he cannot sense her usual attributes. Claire gathers the students and announces an upcoming trip to the Beast Glades for herself, Arthur, and Curtis, which will require a reorganization of patrol duties. Kai asks for volunteers to take on extra patrol hours. A blonde elf-eared student named Doradria volunteers unexpectedly, claiming that she has no friends to hang out with. Claire is surprised by Doradria's offer, as it seems out of character. She accepted, noting that she had never been on a patrol with Doradria before. Kai enthusiastically declares Arthur his rival and follows him down the stairs. Kai offers Arthur and Sylvie unsolicited advice about the Beast Glades, emphasizing his status as a class adventurer. Recalls an amusing incident in which Doradria's lunch was stolen by a rodent. She urges Arthur to leave. Arthur, walking with Sylvie and other students, asks Claire about the kind of magic Kai is using. Claire explains that Kai is keeping it a secret, but she knows that the metal cable is a key component. Arthur asks Kai how he controls the wires. Kai offers to tell him, but adds that he would have to kill him, speaking in a joking tone. Arthur takes Kai's comment as a threat, leading to another brief confrontation. Claire intervenes and reminds them to go to class. Elijah, practicing, he talks to Arthur, revealing a long-standing interest in witchcraft, which he pursues mainly to impress girls. Arthur teases him. Arthur offers Elijah some basic sword training. Elijah accepts, initially believing it to be another attempt to impress the girls. However, Arthur quickly disarms and kicks him, proving the point about practicality. They spar, with Arthur easily parrying Elijah's attacks and commenting on his excellent technique. Arthur analyzes Elijah's movements, impressed by his stability and efficient swing. He speculates that Elijah has the potential to become a skilled swordsman. He ponders that, combined with his unique metal magic, Elijah could become very formidable. Arthur disarms Elijah and quickly drops him. Arthur explains that Elijah lost control of his anger, leading to a reckless attack. Elijah experiences a sudden surge of intense emotion. He appears to be in distress, both physically and emotionally. Arthur is immediately concerned. Elijah is overwhelmed by the emotions he is experiencing. Arthur offers to take him to the infirmary. Elijah claims to be fine and dismisses the incident, saying the sensation has passed. He attributes it to the fall. Arthur is suspicious but accepts Elijah's explanation. They part. Autumn had arrived in Xyrus. Leaves fell from the shady trees around the magnificent academy. The week passed peacefully, if a little boringly. Arthur sat on the grass practicing magic with Sylvie. Professor Glory and her green-haired assistant enthusiastically checked on Arthur's progress. As midterm approaches, Arthur finds it difficult to keep up with all of his classes. However, he continues to study diligently. Arthur meets Tasha for a walk, so the little moments in Arthur's daily life with the people he cares about are what he looks forward to most each day. Arthur meets a classmate of Elijah's who looks dazed. His friend confesses that he is worried about upcoming exams. They discuss the planned visit to the Beast Glades with Professor Glory's class. Elijah reminds Arthur not to train too hard with Tasha. They go their separate ways. Sylvie senses that something is troubling Elijah. Arthur agrees that he senses it too. Tasha practices with Arthur. Arthur praises Tasha's progress, but Tasha is too proud. Arthur warns Tasha not to be overconfident. They have a small argument, with Tasha reminding him that she is a year older than Arthur. Tasha gets angry and attacks Arthur more aggressively, who is sitting on a rock watching them lazily. Virian suddenly appears near Arthur and Tasha, who are practicing. Tasha is shocked and asks what Virian is doing in Xyrus. Virian explains that he came to visit Tasha, his favorite granddaughter. Tasha asks Virian to stop being weird. Tasha pulls on Virian's beard and Virian groans in pain. Virian explains that he has been worried about Tasha since the visit to the dungeon and wants to confirm Tasha's condition before the visit to the Beast Glades tomorrow. He wants to ask Cynthia to watch over Tasha, but Cynthia is out. Virian asks Arthur to take Tasha with him when he visits his family tonight. Arthur refuses, imagining his parents' reaction if he brought Tasha home. Eventually, however, he is forced to comply with Virian's request. On the way, Arthur still can't believe he brought Tasha with him. Arthur and Tasha arrive at Arthur's home. Arthur's family is waiting for them and do not seem surprised by Tasha's presence. Arthur's mother greets them warmly. Ellie, Arthur's sister, takes Tasha to see the progress of her archery skills. Tasha enthusiastically follows Ellie into the house. Arthur smiles slightly and looks more relaxed. Alia is walking through a dark tunnel in the Beast Glades. Glowing vines guide her. She comes to a fork in the path and stops. Alia realizes that Lansvari was right. The titanic bloodworms she encountered were not moving at random. Based on the pattern of the tunnels, they all seem to be heading for the same area, the Grand Mountains. If that was the case, Alia was ready to continue her investigation. Alia follows the trail of vines. She runs fast, then stops suddenly at the edge of a ravine. A boulder falls into the gorge. A two-headed, snake-like monster with horns emerges from the abyss. Alia recognizes it as the Hades serpent, but she is confused because the color and horns of the monster are different from the descriptions she has read. Alia finds it strange that the Hades serpent, a species that does not care about its offspring, is guarding a tunnel. She then contacted Lansvari through a communication device and reported her findings. Lansvari tells his troops to prepare. Tasha waits for further instructions while keeping an eye on the Hades serpent. A man with dark blue hair who looks like a waiter is placing plates on a table. Another waiter with light brown hair is standing at a small table nearby. Arthur and Tabitha are holding an intoxicated Vincent. Lelia says, "If you keep getting drunk every time I come home, I'll just stay in school." Her father replies, "Don't be like that. Don't be mean." Her mother said, "I might really cry if you stop coming to see me." Lilia replied, do you know how embarrassed I was when he told me all those stories? She continued in front of the principal again. Then Lilia asked, by the way, where did he go? Arthur explained, Tess wanted to get some fresh air, so my mom went with her so she wouldn't get lost. Arthur asked, are you taking Ellie to her room? Reynold is holding Ellie. He says, I think Big Brother should do it. Reynold says, your sister always asks when you're going to visit her, at least once a day. Reynold continues, you should tell her you're leaving tomorrow morning in case she wakes up late. Alice and Tasha sitting outside enjoying the night view. Alice says, thank you for coming today. I know it must be awkward for you. Tasha replies, I am very happy. It was very nice to see Lilia and Arthur's father. Alice smiles a little and says, I think the word you mean is embarrassing. Tasha replies, maybe that too. Alice and Tasha are still sitting together enjoying their tea. Tasha asks, are you worried about Arthur going to the dungeon tomorrow? Alice replies, of course I am. Tasha continues, even though he's already so strong? Alice looks serious as she says, even though Arthur is stronger than all the lances combined, I'm still worried. That's how unpredictable and dangerous dungeons can be, even the most benign ones. Alice says, sorry, I didn't mean to scare you before your journey. Tasha says, it's okay and you need not worry, Mrs. Lewin, just like she did for me. I will protect Arthur if anything happens to him. Alice said, that's very sweet of you, but I'd rather you didn't. You're a precious daughter to your parents too. How devastated would they be if something happened to you? Alice continued, your own safety should come first. I trust my daughter to take care of herself. The woman with light brown hair said, by the way, it's getting cold. Would you like to go inside? Tasha said, I think I'll stay outside a little longer. Thanks for showing me around. Alice replied, of course. Alice returns home. Tasha stays outside alone. Arthur approaches Ellie's bed and says, oh, are you awake? Ellie asks, what time is it? Arthur replies, it still might. Ellie asks again, when are you leaving? Arthur said, tomorrow morning. Ellie asked, can't you stay a little longer? Arthur replied, unfortunately, no. But I'll be back for a week after the dungeon trip. The girl asked, well, can you at least tell me some stories? The light brown-haired woman replied, I don't know, I have to get up early in the morning. Ellie pouted. Arthur said, what stories would you like to hear? Ellie said, you haven't finished telling me how you became a professor. Arthur thought for a moment. Wait, where did I stop? Well, Professor Geist's Ember Wisp spell couldn't be stopped once it was activated, so I went in and pulled Cathilne away while she was helpless. Ellie asked, Cathilne, you mean King Sapin's daughter, Cathilne? Arthur replied, yes. Ellie is surprised. You saved another princess? Arthur replies, you make it sound like I was deliberately looking for a princess to save. Anyway, after I rescued her, I challenged the professor to a duel. Ellie smiled. To impress the princess, was it? Arthur replied, not at all. To make a long story short, after I defeated Professor Ghost, the headmaster of Xyrus Academy contacted me and asked if I wanted to become a teacher. Ellie asked, and you accepted? Arthur replied, of course not. Just like that, who do you think I am? I kept turning them down until I got access to a section of the library where only certain professors had access. Ellie asked, that's it. Arthur continued, I also have a private study room lined with mana crystals. Teachers and other DC officials are also lenient with me because of this, which gives me more time to practice. So are you a good teacher? Ellie replied, of course. Some students who weren't even in my class came to watch. Ellie said, really? They would if I didn't. So you used the practice room there with Elijah and Tasha? Arthur replied, sometimes. But lately Gideon has been making some progress with Toby. Ellie asked, what's a Toby? The sound of birds chirping can be heard. Reynold yawns in his room. Alice enters and asks, darling, have you seen Arthur? The man replies, he's not in his room. Reynold says, maybe he's having breakfast. Alice replied, he couldn't have left. Could he? Alice asks. Is Ellie awake? Ronald and Alice look into a room. Inside, Arthur is sleeping on the bed with Ellie and Sylvie. A snowy landscape with paths and some buildings in the distance. A group of students are standing near a large reindeer. A purple-haired woman in armor says, "Everyone, gather with your teams." Arthur says to Sylvie, "You should use this time to hunt while we're in the dungeon." Sylvie said, "Are you sure?" Arthur replied, "Of course. It's a low-level dungeon, and Professor Glory will be with us the whole time." Sylvie said, "Okay." Sylvie said, "Let me know if anything's wrong." Then Arthur gave her a thumbs up. Arthur muttered, "I still can't believe Professor Glory put me on her team." Lucas said, "Yeah, I've been here a lot. That is, until it became too easy for me. I am a class adventurer after all." The other students were amazed to hear this. One woman said, "Very cool. Just what you would expect from the Wykes family." Then Arthur said, "I heard from an adventurer friend that your license has been revoked." Lucas said, "Are you so jealous of my popularity?" To which Arthur replied, "Why, I was just telling the truth." A black-haired student said, "Enough." The black-haired student continued, "We still have to decide on a team leader before we go in." Lucas said, "What do you mean, decide?" "Of course I'll be the leader." Arthur and another student said, "I vote for Tesher." Arthur said, "You already have leadership experience as student council president, and you're a mid-level wizard who can keep an eye on everyone. And if she's the leader, we can call our team the Queen and the Knights." Lucas muttered, "Idiot." The purple-haired woman said, "Everybody ready? You all know each other's abilities, so make sure you use the basic placement and team tactics we've learned in class. Let's go." The purple-haired woman leads the group of students into the dungeon.